procuring DERs to help meet these targets. What stage would you say that SCE is in currently?
I think it's in the very early stages. Certainly you heard a lot this morning about pilots. We're doing pilots as well. Certainly the integrated distributed energy resource proceeding that was concluded, at least one big decision last December to kick off some deferral pilots with a new earning mechanism that will kick off this year. We have our GRC, which has some deferral projects as well in that. And so I think those are still relatively new. There's a track record with the large-scale projects. We know how they operate. We know their ability to provide the energy to serve the load. I think with distributed energy resources, particularly when we talk about aggregated distributed energy resources or packages of distributed energy resources, maybe solar and storage together, solar storage with demand-side management, how those perform, we're still learning a lot. And we'll be testing that even as we implement, right? Because I think when it comes to both the dependability, durability, and availability, which is what we already really have very good data about with our own utility-owned assets, those are the things that we're going to be testing with respect to distributed energy resources, the dependability, the durability, and the availability of those resources to meet the need when it's called on.
Yeah, certainly, and I think aggregation was talked about a lot this morning. And when you look at the players who are providing aggregation, both as far as sort of an integrator or developer perspective, also on the hardware side, these tend to be much newer companies, much younger companies. In terms of how much are you looking at both the dependability of the technical services themselves, but also of the folks that are actually pulling the aggregators themselves?
Well, we're looking at both. Yeah, so from the system operations side of things, they're very much focused on the ability of the technology to dependably meet the requirement. I think from the procurement side of things, the credit ratings, that sort of thing is what helps protect our customers at the end of the day when we're signing contracts of the, I guess, if there's the risk associated with a new company that doesn't have a long track record. So we look at it from both ends, but the contract helps protect our customers at the end of the day. And then the system operators are looking at it from the technical operating. Is it performing per the contract when it's called upon, right? Sure. And our biggest test right now really is with the preferred resources pilot that we're doing in South Orange County. So it's the one that's been the longest. We kicked that off in 2012. And so we have a little bit more time in terms of record to see how it's performed. Is that 2012? No, I started in 2012. We kicked it off in 2014, sorry. And so contracts have been signed, and there have been resources that have come online to test the ability at that circuit level if we're seeing it perform.
Okay, and maybe from that perspective, what are some of the key lessons learned from still early stages, of course, but already what have you gleaned from that?
So we've gleaned that we have to be very specific about what our ask is. We've only had one RFO. We do have a second one pending. And we also realize that we have to be coordinated with those contractors because we, like I said, have our own programs that we are offering, and then we're going out and contracting for those services. So it's really important that we're not duplicating efforts, because at the end of the day, it is about the customer experience and wanting to make sure that the customer has a good experience. So if they're getting inundated with calls from both the utility or providers under contract for the utility on the customer program and services side, but then also getting contacted by providers on the DER side, we're trying to avoid that. So we're not inundating customers with the same offerings or different offerings, but they're both claiming they're working for Edison, which they are. So it's just trying to work through that complication.
Yeah, I think that's also something that was brought up this morning, was just the sophistication of customers in general. Yeah. And so as you think about bringing more DER services, and then also thinking about rates and how they might transition as well, how how do you ensure that the average customer isn't just lost in, secondary in this sort of rush to capture this market?
Yeah. And that's a great question. The customer really, at the end of the day, is at the center of it all, because all this really is intended. Our business is intended to serve the customer and ensure that reliability, affordability, the delivery being safe, and then certainly here in California, the clean energy aspect. So all of our customers are really focused in on that and interested in that. And so trying to ensure that at the same time that you have new technologies coming on, new requests for different types of rate structures, pricing mechanisms that really get at the uses of the grid, not just the usage from the grid or to the grid. And so there's a lot happening, in that space, and a number of proceedings that are, I see the commission really working to try and integrate those and time them in a way that does work. We, of course, have our rate design where the tiers are flattening, going to the two-tier structure here in California. We have time of use rates that are going to go into effect that were mentioned earlier, where there's pilots going on now with default TOU happening in the next couple of years. And so there's a lot going on to try and ensure that the customers are aware, are educated, quite a bit of work with the community groups, because at the end of the day, often the customer really likes to hear the message from an organization that they trust. Mm-hmm. And so, you look at what we mail, how many people get mail from the utility and it goes straight in, come on, are you guys reading your mailers or your emails? And so we recognize that the one-off communications, as much as we want people to read what we're putting into their bill inserts, may not be read. And so how do we get information out then in different ways that we are hoping customers will then get the information that way, whether it's through community organizations, certainly workshops and that sort of thing. But it's going to be an ongoing process, not just a one-off, because of how important it is. And I don't know that customers need to be able to explain time of use rates. I think it's probably going to be impossible for that to happen necessarily for all of our customers to understand that thoroughly. But if they can understand that by changing their behaviors, they can save money, by shifting their usage, they can save money. Those are the kinds of things that we just really want to make sure they understand at the time when those rates go into effect, right?
Mm-hmm. Sure, of course. And so we've kind of dived into a few topics here, but again, maybe taking a little bit of a step back. Southern California Edison, a little bit more than a few months ago, and then also with California's Distributed Energy Action Plan, kind of identified a few common steps for how do we get to this DER future, right? And had modernizing the grid, and then looking at DER access to markets, and finally with what we just talked about of the transition of customer rates. So maybe going to a topic that we haven't touched on, which is modernizing the grid. I think a lot of people talk about that, but from SEC's perspective, what does that really actually look like?
So it's interesting, we talk a lot about a modern grid or a digital modern grid, and in our mind, it is something where the customer, it basically becomes a plug and play grid for our customers. So when they choose our technologies, they can easily integrate to our systems. So it includes not just the planning, the forecasting piece of the system, but then having the right technologies, the communication network, the smart self-healing network. Those are the kinds of things that we talk about within grid modernization. Automation, these are things that are all intended not just to help with DERs, but really to help improve reliability of the overall system, safety of the system. SCE is not in the top quartile for reliability, and we do believe that much of the investment that we are looking at making in modernizing the grid will actually improve our reliability numbers when we compare ourselves to other peer utilities. So it's not just about integrating distributed energy resources. A lot is really around ensuring the reliability and safety of the system so that customers continue to add new technologies without any concern from both our employee perspective and public safety perspective.
Sure, and I think we have a question from the audience that's related to that. And basically, just reading it, it's how useful to SCE is real-time usage and generation data at that home level, and how might you actually use that aggregate data?
I mean, I think in the immediate term, it's not going to be as useful as down the road where we see more planning at the circuit level. And then with that, there may be opportunities to be going out there with new programs that are, that I guess reflect the circumstances on the system. Today, we don't really have the technology to do that effectively. And so that situational awareness of what's happening is, especially when it comes to with the distributed energy resources, isn't there. And so with the additional technologies that we're looking at adding to the grid and having that visibility of what's happening on the system, I think that will be more important.
Okay, so even just to start having that visibility is a first step there.
I mean, really, when you think about distributed energy resources providing grid services, the utility has to have the visibility to see that it is performing per the contract. And right now, we really don't have that visibility. So when we're signing these things, it's not as though we're able to really see real time what's happening. And so a big part of our investment will be to be able to provide that, have that, so that it does enable more opportunities for distributed energy resources to provide distribution grid services. They already are providing, as you know, wholesale to the wholesale market, and probably more opportunities there with the CAISO's DERP program. But I think with that additional visibility and technology on the distribution system, they'll have additional opportunities there on the distribution system as well.
Okay. Yeah, and in terms of, well, maybe going back to the earlier conversation around grid modernization and, again, kind of just even having the ability to see what's happening as part of that effort. What is a kind of appropriate timeline to even think about all of this being deployed?
We see the advancement of distributed resources happening quite rapidly, right? We're integrating, connecting, on average, about 4,500 rooftop solar systems a month. We see the increasing utilization of electric vehicles. Certainly, the number of customers who are adding smart technologies like smart thermostats and energy home control systems, that sort of thing. So at the end of the day, we could really see 1.5 million distributed resources on the system here in the next 10, 15 years. And so the grid has to get modernized to accommodate that. So I think at the same time that these technologies are being adopted by our customers, the grid has to be able to accommodate that and really be ahead of it so that it can accommodate it without having issues. When we look at what happened in Hawaii and the very rapid adoption of solar that occurred there, and then the difficulty the utility had in interconnecting those systems in a very short period of time, that's not something we want. And it led to real significant customer dissatisfaction in Hawaii. And we're looking to have good customer satisfaction here at SCE. So those are the types of things where when we make those investments, we are intending to really help the customer and the system. And so 2030, again, going back to the 40% below 1990 level target, 13 years away. That's 4 general rate cases for a utility like Southern California Edison. So we don't have a lot of opportunities then to go in and ask for what we think is needed and then make those investments and get it going. So that's why we think it really needs to happen now. They're foundational investments that really do, as I said, improve reliability, enhance safety, and then also enable DERs. And as more distributed resources come online, that just continues to improve. But it's a big service territory, 50,000 square miles. So I think we really feel like we need to get started now in order to be ready in 2030 and able to accommodate all that we see happening and that the state is interested in seeing happen, right? So we're at, I don't know, a little over 200,000 vehicles today in California, and the idea is to try to get to 1.2 or even more for the 2030 target. And that's just the light duty vehicles, but you also have others, the whole transportation sector. So, I mean, there's just a lot to do in a very short period of time at the end of the day.
Absolutely. So, and speaking of a short period of time, I feel like we've only barely scratched the surface, but only have a few minutes left. So maybe just jumping around a little bit here with some audience questions. Someone has asked, basically, where was that? Does SCE actually prefer that DER owners participate in the wholesale markets at all? Do they encourage it, or would you prefer that they not?
Oh, I think we support customers' choices. So if customers want to participate in the wholesale market, they should be able to participate in the wholesale market. That interaction between the ISO and the distribution operators, the utilities today, I think that will continue to evolve in order to accommodate more opportunities for distributed resources to go into the wholesale market. But that's happening today, so we certainly see opportunities for that to continue. And there may be even more opportunities really for those distributed resources at the wholesale transmission level than at the distribution level, for the reasons that we heard earlier, where the distribution system is such a dynamic system. We rerouted power, I think, like 22,000 times in 2015. That just doesn't happen in the transmission system. So it's a little bit more predictable, able to see a need, put out a request, and have distributed resources meet that need. The distribution system, because it is so dynamic and changes, when we do our planning, even today, what we forecast as maybe a local need, the next year it could change just because that housing development didn't happen as quickly as we thought, or this other building, a large big box store moved. And so those things really change the nature of the need right there at that local level. But yeah, so in terms of the question itself, do we support? Yes, if customers want to move to participate in the wholesale market, we support that.
Mm-hmm. And then jumping off of, so you're talking about how dynamic the planning process has to be, and one of those things, from what we heard this morning was customers, defecting into like CCAs or perhaps even with retail choice, and suddenly, how does that influence your ability to plan not only customer load but also DER deployment and all of these other things we've been talking about?
You need to have Eric Takayoshi here, our director of system planning. So it definitely adds a wrinkle, right? It's just another wrinkle that we have to accommodate in our forecasts. I think we certainly see, as you heard on the earlier panel, the utility being that delivery mechanism. So that's why we are very focused on the wires business and making improvements to ensure that reliable system, whether the customer ends up going to a CCA for their energy, we'll still be the ones that are delivering that energy to the end-use customer. So in terms of predicting what we may need to purchase to meet the need, that certainly, with the movement of CCAs and potentially now the idea of opening retail choice, certainly is going to add to the complexity of planning. But it's, I think we've always dealt with complexity in the planning process, and it's just another 2 or 3 more added factors we'll have to add. So.
Sure, and then you'll get another set of responsibilities there,
exactly.
Right? So just with the last 30 seconds or so that we have left for this session, I'm curious to hear, what Southern California Edison is looking for or needs from the folks in the audience out here who are vendors, integrators, the industry, other sorts of stakeholders. What are you looking for?
Well, I think we work with actually a number of the people in this room already to provide services to the utility on behalf of our customers. So we're always looking for opportunities to partner with providers on behalf of the customers to get to the reliable, affordable service that they're expecting. And so your ideas are certainly welcome. As you know, as I mentioned earlier in my disclaimer, a lot of proceedings, a number of you are already involved in those proceedings. And so it's the dialogue that really helps to get us moving forward and trying to build that consensus on moving California towards a clean energy future. And I do think we are benefiting by the fact that in this state, we really see a real uniformity of support for moving forward towards a low carbon, clean energy future. That is a great benefit. And if you have that end goal in mind, then I think there are a lot of opportunities to work together to reach that goal.
Great, fantastic. Well, I'm sorry we only had a short time. I feel like we could have picked your
Red
brain
blinking
forever.
light up here. So,
But please give a round of applause to Caroline Choi.